arquebuses and muskets would be considered main weapons. So already the fact that some of these articles say that it's the superior Spanish swords that defeated the Japanese katana, kind of don't understand the purpose of swords, which were mostly used as a last resort weapon, or in the specific case of Spanish tercios, to execute wounded enemies once the battle was over.
So Spanish swordsmen beat samurais, but he wants to focus on the strawman fallacy of the Cagayan battles as being tercios versus the samurais. The Wikipedia page, which he himself referred to, doesn't even say that it was tercios, as far as I recall. It says this here that you can see. So he knows it is Spanish swordsmen versus samurais and other Asians. But he wants to do a strawman fallacy, because by taking down the strawman, it looks like he actually did some debunking. And yeah, you can debunk a scarecrow version of the accounts, but you're actually ignoring the real accounts. And he's in denial. He also pretends that the Japanese didn't get guns from the Portuguese. He referred to this page, which tells him that they got it from the Portuguese. So he wasn't ignorant, he just lied. The Japanese bring artillery and many arquebusiers from the Portuguese. The Japanese, therefore, were not at a technological disadvantage. They had the numerical advantage and the same level of technology. So you know he's a fraud who lies to people about the event, changing the story to fit his narrative of samurais are number one. He lied about Spanish swords by pretending that it was only guns they were using, or mostly only guns. Again, the rodeleros were not mostly guns. Their definition is shield bearers and sword wielders. That's what they are. There were also gun users, the musketeers, and pikemen. But rodeleros are there, and he just turned a blind eye because he has prejudice for the Japanese. I mean, they're very cool, but you shouldn't let that blind you. And he also lied about Japanese guns by pretending that they didn't have any, by omission, the glaring omission of that fact, which destroys his claim that the Spanish won only thanks to gunpowder.
But the reason why we can still trust the accounts is the following. Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar as it's pronounced in classical Latin, first is an eyewitness of both the continental Celts and the Britons, since he went to Britannia twice, both in 55 and 54. Second, we have many other accounts, both Greek and Roman of different times, that mention what these Celtic people looked like.
I am the Metatron. I know that you can trust Romans cause 1. They were in the regions they raped. 2. Other sources corroborate. Hipocrita. 1. Spaniards were in Cagayan. 2. Other sources corroborate. The Chinese say there were Japanese pirates around. Japan said it wanted to invade Filipinas. Now, a crackdown on the woko in Japan and China meant the outlaws moved south. And there's Cagayan, pretty close to the south. It's actually the northernmost part of the south, in a way. Nagamasa was a Japanese adventurer who moved to what is now Thailand. And he became the governor of the southern province there. Now, because of persecutions of Catholic Mary-worshipping heretics by Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, some ronin on the losing side of battles also went south, so there was an influx of samurais in southern parts of Asia. And during the Ayutthayan succession conflict of that time, some guy rebelled against Mr. Thong. The usurper sent the influential Japanese adventurer Yamada Nagamasa with his mercenary force to quell the rebellion, and that's why he was made governor. Now, it says Japanese mercenary force. What could that be? Well, samurais, of course. Samurais in Siam means that Filipinas, closer to Nippon, also must have had many samurai mercenaries. See the difference in distances?
if the red zone has so many samurais, how much more would the green zone have had? Logic. Now, according to the Naval War College Review, the Spanish hired samurais as mercenaries in some cases, including from the Japanese community in the Philippines. Aparri was formerly a Japanese trading post in the north of Luzon. So there were Japanese there all the time. So to say that there were no Japanese or very few is a great exaggeration, tantamount to lying, which Black Legend people like the Metatron so-called do. In the Battle of Aljubarrota between Portugal and Spain and their respective allies, the same people who say that a few Spaniards could not have beaten the odds against samurais never question when the outnumbered Portuguese and longbowmen beat Spaniards, because they're hypocrites. The government of Japan says, our ancestors were not pirates, they were benevolent seafarers. The Japanese government does not want to admit that the Japanese were pirates, so it lies about them, but only a fool would believe their propaganda of benevolent seafarers. The Ryukyu kingdom was invaded by Japan, so the Japanese kept going further south, extending their homeland southwards towards Cagayan. So more and more the Japanese were headed south. And people like the Metatron have to ignore historical context time and time again, because they're frauds. When the first Europeans started to navigate in the Pacific Ocean's west, they regularly encountered Japanese ships. According to the history of Ming, 3 out of 10 Wukko were Japanese. And it says generally true Japanese were 3 out of 10, the subordinates, the Japanese 7 out of 10. So the Chinese say that the leaders of the pirates were Japanese, and that a significant minority were Japanese. So to say that there were barely any Japanese is a lie. There wasn't barely. 3 out of 10 isn't barely, it's a significant chunk. And especially when that chunk is the leadership. So China agreed with Spain that pirate leaders were Japanese.
I think the Romans would do a better job than any medieval army that actually faced the Mongols during the Mongol invasion.
Chasing cartoons, I'm a weeaboo. I live in my mom's house, I'm like 32. I collect swords and throwing stars, I'm a weeaboo. Sticks and stones, they break my bones, but I will always be one step ahead of you, 'cause I read the manga. Haven't showered in like 16 weeks. All my friends and peers are ashamed of me, 'cause all of a sudden I think I'm Japanese. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. A filthy weeaboo. A dirty weeaboo. A fucking weeaboo. Disgusting weeaboo. Japan is superior to other countries. I learned a bit of Japanese, and now I'm qualified to be part of the community. So I changed my avatar to a kawaii waifu. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo. Filthy weeaboo. A dirty weeaboo. A fucking weeaboo. Disgusting weeaboo. Yes, I'm a weeaboo.